Breaking news, North Korea's artillery attack against a South Korean island. The deadly attack this morning set homes and buildings on fire in civilian areas, sending thick black smoke into the sky, as you can see there. The White House has issued a statement this morning saying the United States strongly condemns this attack and calls on North Korea to halt its belligerent action and to fully abide by the terms of the armistice agreement.
On November 23, 2010, the small island of Yanpyong was bombarded by rocket artillery from North Korean BM-21s, causing indiscriminate but significant damage to civilian and military infrastructure. Over the next 2 hours, South Korean and North Korean artillery would exchange counter-battery fire, while both Koreas scrambled air assets in preparation for further escalation. Thankfully, the exchange did not escalate further. However, when the dust settled, 4 South Koreans were dead, and a further 19 were wounded. This attack by the North would come just 7 months after the South Korean Pohang-class corvette, Cheonan, sank under mysterious circumstances near the island of Baekgyeong. Subsequent investigations concluded that the ship sank by a torpedo from a North Korean submarine. These are 2 of the 5 most recent and brazen attacks by the North against South Korea that follow a pattern of concentrated attacks in the last 25 years by North Korea on what is known as the 5 West Sea Islands. But why is North Korea so fixated on attacking such small, sparsely populated islands of little military significance? It all comes down to a dispute over a maritime border known as the Northern Limit Line. The Northern Limit Line owes its beginnings to the end of the Korean War. During negotiations on how to partition the nascent Korean states, the agreement to divide Korea along the infamous 38th parallel was made. Contrary to popular belief, this wasn't a status quo antebellum approach. The 2 Koreas' boundaries were different before the war began, and the decision to use the 38th parallel resulted in both sides gaining territory they hadn't previously held. While the 2 sides were in agreement concerning the land border, agreeing on a maritime border proved more difficult. North Korea wanted a 12 nautical mile zone for its territorial waters, whereas the United Nations Command insisted on 3 nautical miles. It should be noted that while 12 nautical miles is the international standard today, it was not in 1953. In addition, the armistice specifically mentions 5 islands that, quote, shall remain under the military control of the Commander-in-Chief, UNC. These islands are Baekgyeong-do, Daecheong-do, Seokcheong-do, Yanpyeong-do, and Udo, collectively known as the 5 West Sea Islands. This clause would preclude North Korea from getting 12 nautical miles, as doing so would place the accepted South Korean-controlled islands directly within the North's territorial waters. So, out of the need to prevent South Korean vessels from accidentally provoking a war by straying too far north from any of the 5 West Sea Islands, a very likely occurrence given how close the islands are to North Korea, UNC Commander General Mark Clark promoted the Northern Limit Line that would stretch in between the narrow sea lane between the 5 islands and mainland North Korea. Exactly when the NLL was formally established has been lost to time, but most sources agree it was before 1960. For 2 decades, the North Korean government was relatively quiet about the Northern Limit Line, choosing instead to focus its military resources against the South along the DMZ in a series of renewed hostilities known as the DMZ conflict. It wasn't until 1973 when the North began to voice its opposition to the Northern Limit Line, deriding it as an infringement on the sovereignty of North Korea's territorial waters. Demands were made that the border be redrawn in the interests of fairness, were promptly made and ignored by the United Nations. However, despite the incursion by the occasional northern fishing boat, the LOC would remain calm for another 26 years. It wouldn't be until the final year of the millennium that push would come to shove. On June 15, 1999, in what would be known as the First Battle of Yanpyong, North Korean patrol boats sailed across the Northern Limit Line into southern waters. The South Korean Navy responded with their own fast boats and began ramming the northern vessels. Soon after, gunfire was exchanged after a North Korean vessel was rammed repeatedly by several South Korean boats. The North was resoundingly defeated in the engagement and lost at least 1 vessel, with the rest limping across the Northern Limit Line. It was in the aftermath of this engagement that the North announced it no longer recognized the Northern Limit Line, and instead proposed a new maritime border that gave the North the now international standard 12 nautical mile territorial waters along the LOC. North Korea posed that it would still allow South Korea to keep its sovereignty over the islands, but that it would need permission to access them. Needless to say, the South immediately rejected this proposal. Undeterred by its initial defeat, the North would attack again in 2002, this time by ambushing an isolated Chamsuri-class patrol boat, sinking it before retreating across the northern limit line. This event was known as the Second Battle of Yanpyong and was the subject of the 2015 South Korean film Northern Limit Line. North Korea continues to saber-rattle over the islands and maintains a heavy military presence in the area. For North Korea, the issue is more than just about national sovereignty. The issue of having 5 islands belonging to another nation that you're at war with within earshot of the North Korean mainland presents numerous economic and national security issues. For one, the present state of the Northern Limit Line effectively bars North Korea from the lucrative fishing grounds that can be found all around that area, fisheries that would otherwise be well within its exclusive economic zone and territorial waters. Such fisheries would be economically vital to the impoverished socialist state with a long history of food insecurity. Another problem that arises is that due to the manner in which the border was drawn, North Korean merchant ships must navigate around the Northern Limit Line before entering North Korean ports, taking more time and burning more precious fuel for North Korea's merchant fleet. All of these issues put a considerable economic strain on the already economically taxed country. North Korea has continuously appealed to South Korea and the United Nations, stating that the Northern Limit Line violates Article 7 of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which states that maritime borders cannot, quote, cut off the territorial sea of another state from the high seas or an exclusive economic zone. They also cite Article 15, which states that in the event of 2 neighboring states with maritime border conflicts, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is obligated to intervene and arbitrate a border that is fair to both sides. North Korea has even gone as far as to not challenge South Korea's sovereignty over the islands, a bold statement considering the North doesn't even recognize the South as a legitimate state. However, to date, the South has refused to enter dialogue with the North concerning the issue and has blocked any attempt at bringing the issue to the floor at the United Nations. To the south, the issue of the Northern Limit Line is mainly one of national security. While access to the thriving fisheries is important for the economy, the South argues that the Northern Limit Line is imperative for the security of the 5 islands, arguing that extending the North's maritime borders past the islands would make defending them impossible. There have been discussions between the 2 Koreas regarding allowing the North access to the fisheries in the area. However, no progress has been made, and like so many other issues between the two, it remains stagnant. With the North being rebuffed by the international courts and given the middle finger by the South, one must ponder whether or not the North may resort to other, more drastic measures to resolve the issue. In total, since 1999, there have been 5 major engagements between the 2 Koreas around the 5 West Sea Islands. Though North Korea has never tried to take the islands directly, there is a question burning in the minds of many people watching. Could North Korea take the islands by force if they wanted to? The answer is yes, at least temporarily. As we've mentioned before, the islands are significantly closer to North Korea than they are to the south, with the closest, Yanpyong, being just 7.5 miles away from the North Korean mainland. Every single island is well within range of North Korea's massive stockpile of artillery that it is adept at using. In addition, North Korea does regularly train infantry units stationed in the area for amphibious landings, and possesses the landing craft necessary to ferry troops and supplies across the small stretch of ocean. In a hypothetical scenario where North Korea decides to seize the islands by force, North Korea would start by saturating the islands with thousands of artillery shells from all different types, completely neutralizing what small contingent of ROK forces are stationed there before conducting an amphibious assault. The biggest obstacle the North would have to contend with would be the South Korean Navy. South Korea's Navy, by all metrics, is a modern, capable force. However, while North Korea's surface fleet is lacking to say the least, the same cannot be said for their submarine fleet, which would be the biggest threat a South Korean Navy relief force would face. Not only does North Korea possess the largest submarine fleet in the world, due to the island's close proximity to the North, the South Korean Navy would be forced to operate in hostile waters where North Korean submarines could operate in a defensive capacity, ambushing the South Korean fleet from predetermined locations, as is exactly what happened to the Cheonan, a modern corvette that was destroyed by a presumably much older submarine. On top of this, the North Korean coast is saturated with hundreds of anti-ship missiles, ranging from the aging but still lethal HY-1 Silkworm subsonic cruise missile to the newer Kumsong or Venus 3 missile. Given the close proximity of the islands, the South Korean ships would have virtually no time to respond to the missiles before they hit. This particular problem was even referenced in the movie Northern Limit Line, with one character adding that the moment they launch their Silkworm missiles, they, the crew, are all dead. Any real attempt to prevent the North from taking the islands would immediately fall to South Korea's potent air force. Armed with premier American fighters like the F-15, F-16, and F-35, it is more than a match for any aircraft the North could field against them. However, and again due to that pesky geography, penetrating North Korean airspace would be required to reach 3 of the 5 islands. North Korea possesses the densest air defense network in the world and would have to either be avoided or partially neutralized, burning precious time and resources in the process. On top of this, any serious invasion attempt by the North would involve hitting any runways close enough to pose a threat to the landing operations. So, while there's no question that the North could indeed take the islands by force, the real question is for how long and at what cost. For the seizure of the islands to be worth it, the North would have to completely cripple the South's ability to wage war in one single preemptive strike, which is borderline fantasy. As an armed invasion of southern territory would violate the armistice and inevitably lead to the Second Korean War resuming, there would be no way to seize the islands without it immediately accelerating into a full-scale war, a war in which South Korea has demonstrated it has no qualms about fighting. In fact, during the 2010 shelling of Yanpyong, then-President Lee Myung-bak planned a massive retaliatory strike against the North, involving hundreds of F-15s and F-16s, as well as thousands of artillery pieces, with the intent to destroy the North's ability to defend itself or engage in further provocations. It was only when high-level talks with calmer heads in the United States that he eventually relented. Though the North does possess the ability to take the islands, it is highly unlikely that they ever would in the present political climate. North Korea is not interested in igniting a second Korean War over the northern limit line. Instead, it is drawing attention to a maritime border that it views as unfair, in the only way that North Korea knows how. In conclusion, while it is extraordinarily unlikely that North Korea would risk an invasion of the 5 islands, with tensions rising in China with regards to Taiwan, the country it views as a rebellious province, and their vow to reclaim Taiwan with force if necessary, it isn't unthinkable to assume that North Korea could be emboldened to make more daring provocations against what it views as an unfair maritime border, occupied by what it views as an illegitimate puppet government of a foreign regime. However, it is also important to understand that North Korea isn't China and faces challenges that are unique to its own political and geographic situation. If there ever is a solution to the issue of the northern limit line, in all likelihood it will be a diplomatic one, and not one involving the use of force. This has been Jesse from Chosun Punseok, and I hope you all have a great day.